Carol Reed's hands trembled as she set down her wine glass, the words hanging in the air between them like a bridge neither was ready to cross. "You can try my lipstick," Linda Cruz had said, her voice barely above a whisper, "or I could just kiss it onto you." The offer had opened a door that neither could close, and now Carol found herself staring into Linda's dark eyes, seeing her own desperate longing reflected back. "Linda," she breathed, her voice catching on the name she'd whispered in her dreams for months. "I've been waiting for you to say something like that for so long I was starting to think I'd imagined all of this." Linda moved closer on the couch, her knee brushing against Carol's thigh, the contact sending electricity through both their bodies. "You didn't imagine anything," Linda said, reaching up to cup Carol's face with gentle fingers. "I've been thinking about kissing you for weeks now, maybe longer. I just didn't know how to tell you." Carol's heart hammered against her ribs as she leaned into the touch, her eyes fluttering closed for a moment before opening again to meet Linda's gaze. "Can I?" Linda whispered, her thumb brushing across Carol's cheekbone. "Please," Carol managed, the word barely audible. Linda closed the distance between them, her lips soft and warm against Carol's, tentative at first, then more certain as Carol kissed her back with all the longing she'd been holding inside. The taste of Linda's cherry lipstick mixed with the wine they'd been sharing, creating something entirely new and intoxicating. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Linda rested her forehead against Carol's. "That felt," Linda started, then stopped, searching for words. "Right," Carol finished softly. "It felt right." Linda nodded, her fingers still tracing patterns on Carol's skin. "I've never felt anything like that before. Not with anyone." Carol's chest tightened with a mixture of joy and terror. "Linda, I need you to know something. I've been in love with you for 8 months and 12 days. Since the night you showed up at my door crying about Marcus, and I made you tea, and we talked until sunrise." Linda's eyes widened, her breath catching. 8 months. Carol nodded, unable to look away from Linda's face. "I counted every day, every conversation, every time you touched my hand or fell asleep on my shoulder watching movies. I've been dying inside, watching you try to make things work with him when all I wanted was to tell you that what you were looking for was right here." Tears gathered in Linda's eyes as she processed Carol's confession. "Oh, Carol. I'm so sorry. I was so blind, so confused about what I was feeling. I kept telling myself that what I felt for you was just friendship, that the way my heart raced when you smiled at me was normal." She laughed shakily. "I was measuring every moment with Marcus against what I had with you, and he always came up short. I thought something was wrong with me." Carol reached for Linda's hands, intertwining their fingers. "There's nothing wrong with you. You were just figuring yourself out." Linda squeezed Carol's hands tighter. "I want to try this. With you. I'm terrified and I don't know what I'm doing, but I know I can't pretend anymore that this isn't what I want." Carol felt something inside her chest unfurl, like a flower finally receiving sunlight after months in shadow. "We'll figure it out together," she promised. "We don't have to have all the answers right now." But to understand how they arrived at this moment, how two best friends crossed the line from platonic love to something deeper and more complicated. The story began 3 months earlier on a rainy Thursday evening when Linda had arrived at Carol's apartment with mascara streaked down her cheeks and her world falling apart. Carol had been grading papers at her kitchen table when the frantic knocking started, and she'd opened the door to find Linda standing in the hallway, soaked from the rain and shaking. "He doesn't love me," Linda had said without preamble, pushing past Carol into the warmth of the apartment. "Marcus doesn't love me, and I don't think I love him either, and I don't know what that makes me." Carol had guided Linda to the couch, wrapping her in a soft blanket and making chamomile tea while Linda explained through tears that she'd finally confronted Marcus about the distance between them, about how their relationship felt like they were both playing roles they didn't quite understand. "He said he cared about me, but when I asked him if he loved me, really loved me, he couldn't say it," Linda had continued, curling into the corner of Carol's couch like a wounded animal seeking shelter. "And the worst part is, I felt relieved. I felt relieved that he couldn't say it because I don't think I could have said it back." Carol had sat beside her, maintaining careful distance even as every instinct screamed at her to pull Linda into her arms. She'd been in love with Linda for months already, had fallen slowly and completely while watching Linda struggle in a relationship that seemed to drain the light from her eyes. "Maybe that's your answer then," Carol had said gently. "Maybe relief is telling you something important." Linda had looked at her with those dark eyes that haunted Carol's dreams, and for a moment, something had flickered between them, something electric and dangerous and full of possibility. But Linda had looked away, and Carol had swallowed her feelings down like bitter medicine, playing the role of supportive best friend even as her heart ached with wanting. That night had been the first time Linda had asked to sleep in Carol's bed, claiming the couch was too uncomfortable, and Carol had lain awake for hours listening to Linda's breathing, cataloging the way Linda unconsciously moved closer in sleep until they were sharing the same pillow. It had been torture and heaven combined, and Carol had known with devastating clarity that she was in deeper than she'd ever been with anyone. The weeks that followed had been a careful dance of almost moments and loaded silences. Linda had broken up with Marcus officially, but instead of feeling free, she'd seemed more confused than ever. She'd started spending more time at Carol's apartment, showing up with takeout and wine, curling up on Carol's couch like she belonged there. "I feel like I've been sleepwalking through my life," Linda had confessed one evening, her head resting on Carol's shoulder as they watched a movie neither was really paying attention to. "Like I've been going through the motions of what I thought I was supposed to want instead of figuring out what I actually do want." Carol's arm had been around Linda's shoulders, her fingers unconsciously playing with Linda's hair, and she'd felt Linda relax into the touch with a soft sigh. "What do you think you want?" Carol had asked, her voice carefully neutral even as her heart hammered against her ribs. Linda had been quiet for so long Carol thought she'd fallen asleep, but then she'd shifted, tilting her head to look up at Carol with an expression that made Carol's breath catch. "I want to feel the way I feel when I'm with you," Linda had said softly. "Safe and understood, and like I don't have to pretend to be anyone other than who I am." The words had hung between them like a confession and a question combined, and Carol had felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. She'd opened her mouth to respond, to maybe finally tell Linda the truth about her feelings, but Linda had looked away, suddenly self-conscious. "That probably sounds stupid," Linda had mumbled, but Carol had tightened her hold, pressing a kiss to the top of Linda's head. "It doesn't sound stupid at all," Carol had whispered. "It sounds like you're starting to figure out what you need." The shift had begun in earnest 2 weeks later during what Linda had dubbed their Wine and Wisdom Night, a weekly tradition that had evolved from Linda's need to process her post-breakup feelings and Carol's willingness to be her sounding board. They'd been discussing Linda's dating history, trying to identify patterns that might explain why her relationships always felt like she was wearing clothes that didn't quite fit. "I think I've been attracted to the idea of my boyfriends more than the actual men," Linda had mused, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "Like I was checking boxes on some invisible list of what I was supposed to want instead of paying attention to what actually made my heart race." Carol had been quiet, afraid that speaking would somehow break the spell of honesty that had settled over them. Linda had been more open in recent weeks, more willing to examine the deeper parts of herself, and Carol treasured these glimpses into Linda's inner world even as they tortured her with possibilities. "Can I ask you something weird?" Linda had said suddenly, turning to face Carol fully on the couch. Carol had nodded, not trusting her voice. "Have you ever wondered what it would be like to kiss another woman?" The question had hit Carol like lightning, and she'd felt heat flood her cheeks. She'd started, then stopped, unsure how to navigate the dangerous territory Linda was leading them into. "Yes," she'd finally admitted. "I have." Linda's eyes had widened slightly, but not with shock or disgust. If anything, she'd looked relieved. "Really?" "Because I've been thinking about it a lot lately, and I wasn't sure if that was normal or if it meant something or—" Linda had paused, taking a shaky breath, "or if I was just losing my mind." Carol had set down her wine glass with careful precision, her hands trembling slightly. "You're not losing your mind," she'd said softly. "And yes, it's normal to be curious." But even as she'd said the words, Carol had known that what she felt for Linda went far beyond curiosity. She'd been imagining kissing Linda for months, had dreamed about it, had woken up aching with want and the knowledge that her feelings were hopeless. What do you think it would be like? Linda had pressed, moving closer on the couch until their knees were touching. Different from kissing men? Carol had felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong word away from falling into something she couldn't climb back out of. I think, she'd said carefully, it would depend on the woman. On whether there were real feelings involved or if it was just experimentation. Linda had been quiet for a long moment, her gaze dropping to Carol's lips in a way that made Carol's breath catch. What if there were feelings involved? She'd whispered. What if it wasn't just curiosity? The question had hung between them like a bridge Carol was terrified to cross, and she'd felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. Then I think it would be beautiful, she'd admitted, her voice barely audible. I think it would be the kind of kiss that changes everything. Linda had reached for Carol's hand then, their fingers intertwining naturally, and Carol had felt electricity shoot up her arm at the contact. Carol, Linda had said, her voice thick with something that might have been longing, I think I might not be as straight as I thought I was. The confession had stolen Carol's breath, and she'd stared at Linda with wide eyes, afraid to hope and afraid not to. What makes you think that? She'd managed. Linda had smiled shakily, her thumb brushing across Carol's knuckles. Because when I imagine kissing a woman, when I imagine what it would feel like to fall in love with someone who really understands me, I keep seeing your face. The weeks following Linda's revelation had been a careful exploration of new territory, both women navigating uncharted emotional waters with the delicacy of people handling something precious and fragile. Linda had started staying over more frequently, and their physical proximity had increased gradually, naturally, like flowers turning toward sunlight. Carol would find Linda's hand seeking hers during movies, would wake to find Linda had migrated across the bed in sleep to curl against her side, would catch Linda watching her with a new intensity that made her pulse quicken. But neither had been brave enough to name what was happening between them, too afraid of shattering the delicate bubble of possibility they'd created. Carol had continued playing the role of supportive friend even as her feelings intensified, offering advice and comfort while dying inside with want. She'd watched Linda's confidence grow as she explored this new aspect of herself, had seen the way Linda's eyes lit up when she talked about feeling free to question everything she'd assumed about herself. I keep thinking about what you said, Linda had told her one evening as they cooked dinner together in Carol's kitchen, their movements synchronized from months of domestic familiarity. About how a kiss with real feelings would be beautiful and life-changing. Carol had nearly dropped the knife she'd been using to chop vegetables, her heart hammering as Linda moved to stand beside her at the counter. I keep wondering if you were speaking hypothetically, Linda had continued, her voice soft and uncertain, or if you were thinking about someone specific. Carol had forced herself to keep chopping, afraid to look at Linda and reveal too much. Why do you ask? She'd managed, proud of how steady her voice sounded. Linda had been quiet for a moment, and Carol had felt the weight of her gaze. Because I haven't been able to stop thinking about kissing you, Linda had admitted in a rush. And I know that probably makes me a terrible friend, getting confused about my feelings when you've been so supportive, but I can't help it. Every time you smile at me or touch my hand or say something that makes me laugh, I wonder what it would be like if we were more than friends. The knife had stilled in Carol's hand, and she'd finally turned to face Linda, seeing her own longing reflected in Linda's dark eyes. You're not a terrible friend, Carol had said softly. And you're not confused. Linda had stepped closer, close enough that Carol could smell her perfume, could count the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. How can you be so sure? Carol had reached up to cup Linda's face, her thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture that felt both natural and revolutionary. Because I've been in love with you for months, she'd whispered. And I've been watching you discover something about yourself that I've known all along. Linda's breath had caught, her eyes widening with something that looked like relief and wonder combined. Carol, she'd breathed, leaning into the touch. I think I'm falling in love with you too. The admission had hung between them like a gift and a promise, and Carol had felt tears prick her eyes at the beauty of finally hearing the words she'd dreamed about. "Are you sure?" she'd asked, needing to know that Linda understood the magnitude of what she was saying. "I'm terrified," Linda had admitted with a shaky laugh, "but yes, I'm sure. I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You make me feel like I'm home." Carol had pulled Linda closer then, their foreheads touching, both of them breathing heavily with the weight of their confessions. "I want to kiss you so badly it's killing me," Carol had whispered, "but I need you to be absolutely certain this is what you want. Because once we cross this line, I don't think I'll be able to go back to pretending I'm just your friend." Linda had smiled then, the first truly radiant smile Carol had seen from her in months. "I don't want to go back," she'd said firmly. "I want to go forward. With you." That conversation had led them to the couch later that evening, wine glasses in hand, and the air thick with anticipation and nervous energy. Linda had been the one to bring up the lipstick, a nervous laugh escaping her as she'd touched her fingers to her lips. "I've been wondering," she'd said, her cheeks flushed with wine and courage, "what it would be like to leave my mark on you. To kiss you and have everyone be able to see that you're mine." The possessiveness in Linda's voice had sent heat flooding through Carol's body, and she'd set down her wine glass with trembling hands. "Linda," she'd breathed, the name a prayer and a plea combined. "You can try my lipstick," Linda had offered, her voice dropping to a whisper, "or I could just kiss it onto you." The suggestion had been like a match struck in darkness, illuminating all the desire Carol had been holding back, and she'd found herself leaning closer, drawn by the promise in Linda's eyes. "I want you to kiss it onto me," Carol had admitted, her voice thick with longing. "I want everyone to know I'm yours." Linda's eyes had darkened with desire and something deeper, something that looked like love finally acknowledged and accepted. "Are you sure?" she'd asked, echoing Carol's earlier question. "Because once I kiss you, once I make you mine, I'm not letting you go." Carol had reached for Linda's hands, intertwining their fingers and bringing them to her lips to press soft kisses to Linda's knuckles. "I've been yours for months," she'd confessed. "I'm just finally brave enough to admit it." Linda had cupped Carol's face then, her thumbs brushing away tears Carol hadn't realized were falling. "I love you," Linda had whispered, the words falling between them like benediction. "I love you so much it scares me, but not as much as the thought of not having you scared me." Carol had smiled through her tears, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "I love you too," she'd replied. "More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." And then Linda had kissed her, soft and sweet at first, then deeper as months of suppressed longing finally found expression. The taste of Linda's cherry lipstick had mixed with wine and tears and promises, creating something entirely new and perfect and theirs. When they'd finally broken apart, both breathing heavily and foreheads pressed together, Linda had smiled with wonder. "That was," she'd started, then stopped, searching for words. "Everything," Carol had finished softly. "It was everything I dreamed it would be and more." Linda had traced patterns on Carol's arms, her touch gentle and reverent. "I can't believe I almost let fear keep me from this," she'd murmured. "From us." Carol had captured Linda's hand, bringing it to her lips to press kisses to her palm. "We found our way here eventually," she'd said. "That's what matters." Linda had nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. "So what happens now?" she'd asked. "Now we figure it out together," Carol had promised. "One day at a time, one kiss at a time, until this becomes as natural as breathing." Linda had laughed softly, the sound full of hope and possibility. "I like the sound of that," she'd said, leaning in for another kiss. "I like the sound of us." 3 months later, Carol woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Linda humming in the kitchen, and she smiled before she even opened her eyes. The morning light filtered through the curtains of their bedroom, casting everything in golden warmth, and Carol stretched languidly, her body relaxed and content in a way she'd never experienced before Linda became hers. She found Linda at the stove, making pancakes in one of Carol's old college t-shirts, her hair messy from sleep and her lips curved in a soft smile. Good morning, beautiful, Linda said without turning around, somehow always knowing when Carol entered a room. Carol wrapped her arms around Linda's waist from behind, pressing a kiss to her neck and breathing in the familiar scent of vanilla and home. Good morning, she murmured against Linda's skin. Sleep well. Linda leaned back into Carol's embrace, her free hand covering Carol's where it rested against her stomach. Better than I have in years, she admitted. I keep waiting to wake up and find out this is all a dream. Carol tightened her hold, pressing another kiss to Linda's temple. Not a dream, she promised. Just us, finally brave enough to love each other the way we were meant to. Linda turned in Carol's arms, her eyes bright with the kind of happiness that comes from being exactly where you belong. I still can't believe Marcus called yesterday, she said with a laugh, referring to her ex-boyfriend's confused phone call attempting to win her back. The look on his face when I told him I was with you now was priceless. Carol grinned, remembering how protective and proud she'd felt when Linda had taken her hand and introduced her as her girlfriend to Marcus and anyone else who would listen. I think he's still trying to figure out how he lost you to your best friend, Carol said. He doesn't understand that he never really had you to begin with, Linda replied, cupping Carol's face with gentle hands. My heart was always yours, even when I didn't know it yet. Carol felt her chest tighten with overwhelming love for this woman who'd become her everything. I love you, she said, the words as natural as breathing now. I love you too, Linda replied, leaning up to kiss her softly. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. They stayed like that for a moment, foreheads pressed together, sharing breath and promises and the quiet certainty that they'd found something rare and precious. The pancakes began to burn on the stove, but neither of them moved, too caught up in the miracle of loving and being loved in return. We should probably rescue breakfast, Linda said eventually, though she made no move to step away. Probably, Carol agreed, but instead of letting go, she pulled Linda closer, capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted like cherry lipstick and coffee and forever. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and breathless, Linda smiled with the radiance of someone who'd found her home. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that catch you completely off guard, she said, echoing something Carol had told her months earlier when Linda was still figuring out her heart. Carol nodded, thinking about the journey that had brought them here, from friendship to longing to love finally acknowledged and celebrated. Then we're both exactly where we need to be, she replied, and kissed Linda again, tasting the promise of all their tomorrows on her lips.